Second part. After they'd gone a ways, he took a left turn. In a needling tone, a voice asked,
Why don't you stick close to her? You mean to tell me you're so worried about that little tyke you can't sit still? Or is it just that you can't stand to see the suffering on his sister's face? Damn pure or not, seems you're still a little wet behind the ears. Or could it be you're in love with the girl?
Is that what you think? Just whom was Dee talking to? The road ahead was a dusty path that continued on between walls of earth and stone. Aside from the lethargic, vexing rays of the sun as it moved past noon, there was no sign of anyone around. And yet, there was still that voice.
No chance. You're not that kind of softy. After all, you've got his blood in your veins. It's perfect. The way you told them to call you D.
Silence. Judging by the way the man in question had roared in reaction to his name, it seemed the voice had touched on a rather sensitive point. An instant later, his tone became soft once again. You've been full of complaints lately. Would you like to split with me?
Oh no.
The voice exclaimed, sounding a touch threatened. But then, as if to avoid showing any weakness, it replied,
It's not like I'm with you because I like it. Well, you know how it goes. Give and take makes the world go round. Not to change the subject, but why didn't you tell the girl about the mark you put on her neck? Out of loyalty to her father? Just a word from you would have put her at ease. I bet. It must be tough having the blood of the nobility in you.
The voice sounded sincere enough, but the fact that its heart held an entirely different sentiment was made apparent by a burst of derisive laughter. Still, one couldn't help but wonder if the young man had completely lost his mind to continue a dialogue with an imaginary companion as he sat there on his horse. But because the tone, quality, and everything else about the two voices were completely different, the weird scene only seemed possible through some truly ingenious ventriloquism. Dee's eyes sparkled brilliantly, but soon reclaimed their usual quiet darkness, and the conversation came to an end. Shortly thereafter, he took a left at the next corner, came to a similar corner, and once again turned the same way. Eventually, he returned to the front of the physician's home.
Any strange characters out there?
The voice once again echoed from nowhere in particular. None. Given the way he'd answered, it seemed he had in fact gone off to check the surrounding area for any hint of anything out of the ordinary. However, he showed no sign of dismounting as he lifted his beautiful visage and grimaced at the sun listing westward from the center of the sky. "Is that all I can do?" he muttered. Perhaps some vision of the grisly battle to come flitted through his mind. For an instant, a certain expression rose on his oh-so-proper countenance, and then it was gone. A few horses hitched up across the street suddenly grew agitated, and people walking by shielded their eyes from the dust kicked up by an unpleasantly warm wind blowing by without warning. The momentary expression on Dee's face was the same one the mid which Medusas had seen in the subterranean waterway. The face of a blood-crazed vampire. Gazing for a brief moment at the closed door to the doctor's home, Dee reined his horse around and headed out of town. The ruins were 2 hours away. "Here he comes. You should see him on top of the hill any minute," Gimlet said, returning with the wind in his wake. When Regense heard this news, he pulled himself up off the stone sculpture he'd been leaning against. Gimlet was their lookout. Alone, I take it. Yes, sir, just like you told him. Regense nodded, then addressed the other two henchmen who'd been standing there for some time like guardian demons at a temple gate, with their eyes running out across the prairie. Everyone is set, I see. Engage him just as we've planned. Yes, sir. Nodding as Golem and Chula bowed in unison, Regense walked to the horse hitched up behind him. The place the four of them had chosen for this showdown was the same bowl-like depression where Witch had been killed. Challenging Dee to a grudge match in the same location where Dee's aura had battered them and kept them paralyzed was just the sort of thing this vindictive ruffian would do. But consideration had also been given to how useful this location would be for restricting their opponent's movements when they fought him 4 against 1. Regense squatted next to Dan, who lay behind a rock, gagged and bound hand and foot, and pulled down the cloth covering the boy's mouth. Called a gag rag, the cloth was a favorite of criminals. The fabric was woven from special fibers that could absorb all sound, and its usefulness to kidnappers made it worth its weight in gold. Still, there was no call for the cruelty displayed by keeping a boy barely 8 years old gagged ever since the morning. Look, your savior is coming. I put this plan together yesterday after hearing about you and your sister, and I must confess it seems to be going beautifully. Just as Regense finished speaking, the furious gaze that had been concentrated on him was colored by relief and confidence. Dan looked toward the hills. Twisting his lips a bit, Regense sneered, "How sad. Neither of you is fated to leave here alive." "You guys are the one who won't make it out if you're alive." Worried and hungry and looking gaunt, Dan still managed to fling the reply with all his might. He hadn't been given so much as a drop of water since he'd been captured. "You have no idea how tough old D is." His words were strong, but they were also a childish bluff. He'd never even seen D in a fight. Dan thought Regense might fly into a rage, but, to the contrary, Regense only smirked and turned his gaze to his 3 henchmen standing in the center of the depression. "You may be right. That would certainly mean less work for me." Dan's eyes opened wide, as if he must have heard that wrong. But it was true. This gorgeous fiend fully intended to bury his 3 underlings here along with Dee. At first he'd only intended to take care of Dee and Doris, who'd seen his face. But after receiving the Count's oath to turn him into one of the nobility, Regense's plans had taken a complete turn. The power and immortality of a noble would be his. He would no longer be a filthy brigand wandering the wilderness. So, in accordance with the Count's plan, he left Doris for the noble to handle, while he decided to add 3 more people to the pair the Count wanted him to kill. In his estimation, if he allowed his henchmen to live, he would come to regret it later. If Dee should dispatch them all here, so much the better. But if luck is not with me and some survive, I shall kill them myself. A solitary rider popped up over the hilltop. He didn't reduce his speed, but galloped toward them at full tilt. "Well, time to make yourself useful." Grabbing hold of the leather straps that hung around the boy's back, Regense carried Dan over to his horse with one hand, like he was a piece of baggage. The shrike blades on his hip rubbed together, making a harsh, grating noise. Groping in his saddlebag with his free hand, he pulled out the time-bewitching incense "That's strange," he said, tilting his head to one side.
Boss!
At Chilla's tense cry, Regense whirled around, still gripping the candle.
D!
Dan called out, his shirt flying off on the wind. Regense's sworn enemy had already dismounted and now stood at the bottom of the earthen depression with an elegantly curved longsword across his back. Dear Lord. The beauty of his foe left Regense shocked and envious. "I wish I could tell you what an honor it is to have one of my blades knocked down by a man of your kind, but I won't. The fact that you're a miserable cross between a human and a noble takes the charm out of it." To Regense's frigid smile and scornful greeting, Dee softly replied, "And you must be the bastard son of the devil and a hellhound." Regense's entire face grew dark, as if his blood had turned to poison. "Let the boy go." In lieu of a reply, Regense gave Dan's leather bonds a twist with one hand. An agonized cry split the boy's young lips.
"Ow. D, it really hurts."
Though they looked like ordinary leather straps, they must have been tied with some fiendish skill, because they started pressing deep into Dan's shoulders and arms. "These bonds are rather special," Regense said, twisting his lips into a grin and making a small circle with his thumb and forefinger. "Apply force from the right direction, and they pull up tight like this. I figure for a child of 8, it should take 20 minutes or so for them to sink far enough into his flesh to choke the life out of him. If you haven't finished us all off by then, this boy will be cursing you from the hereafter. Does that light a little fire under you?"
D.
What an utterly heartless tactic. The bonds had already begun working their way through his clothes. As the boy writhed in agony, Dee gave him a few powerful words of encouragement. "This'll just take a minute." Meaning he would take care of them in 15 seconds each?
Okay."
Unlike the bravely smiling Dan, the 4 men were livid. The ring formed by Regense's 3 henchmen began to tighten like a noose. All of them were painted by the vermilion rays of the setting sun, but the palpable lust for blood rising from each seemed to rob the light of its color. "Now, let's show him what you can do one by one. Golem, you go first." As his boss gave him the command, not only Golem but all 3 henchmen began to look dubious. After all, the initial plan had been for all 4 of them to attack at once and kill him. But a moment later, Golem's massive brown body raced toward Dee with the silent footfalls of a cat. The broad blade of his machete glittered in the red light. There was a loud clang. His machete was big enough to chop a horse's head off, but just as it was about to hack into the hunter's torso, Dee drew his blade with lightning speed, bringing the tip of it down through Golem's left shoulder. Or rather, it looked like it was going to go right through his shoulder, but it bounced off him. Golem the Tortureless, a man with muscles of bronze. His body had even proved itself impervious to high-frequency wave sabers. Once again, Golem's machete howled through the air, and Dee skillfully dodged it with a leap that carried him yards away in an instant. And once again, the giant went after him, closing on the hunter. "What's wrong? You said 15 seconds each." Like a cry to battle born on the wind, Dee's angry roar shook the grass and filled the mortar-shaped depression in the earth. Second part, end.